Welcome back to the West London Witch. Today's episode contains a story about sexual assault and may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
President Clinton is cutting off aid to Colombia, saying Colombian authorities are not doing enough to fight the drugs.
I have to have 6 hours sleep.
I made a contract for people to sign that was very cut and dry. I must be taken care of.
Introducing the new Dipsy Stuff catalog.
When Carmen and Alan Snedeker moved into their suburban home in Connecticut, they thought it was perfect. Little did they know what evil lurked inside the woodwork. They say their new house, which was once a funeral parlor, was haunted by ghosts. One of the children slept downstairs in the basement, which used to be the morgue. There, a gruesome
Imagine,
wall
it's 1992. You're a suburban mom on your third cup of coffee, enjoying a few quiet hours while your brood of children are at school. You've got a pile of fresh laundry that needs folding, so you pop on the TV to keep you company while you sort socks and try to remember which gym clothes belong to which child. You flip past the news channels, General Hospital, Sesame Street, and reruns of MASH, and settle for a talk show. A trashy, guilty pleasure. It's too early for Geraldo, Johnny Carson, or Letterman, and you've missed Phil Donahue and Jenny Jones, so you flip to Oprah. But she has Mariah Carey on again. Skip. So now you're surfing, when all of a sudden your TV lands on the pastel set of the Sally Jessy Raphael show. There's Sally, her bottle blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her iconic red spectacles resting on her nose, a dark black suit offset by huge costume earrings. This'll do. As you fold and sip your coffee, you realize that you're not just watching any talk show interview, but rather a bizarre circus of reenactments, strange confessions, and nasty confrontations. In what is now TV talk show history, Carmen and Alan Snedeker, along with their niece, son, neighbors, and the famed ghost hunters Ed and Lorrain Warren, took to the Sally Jessy Raphael show to share their horrifying experiences in their Southington, Connecticut home. According to Alan and Carmen, the once funeral home they moved into was brimming with violent, terrifying, and sexual paranormal activity. They described on national daytime television how they heard haunting disembodied voices, ghostly music filling the home, terrible smells corrupting the space. And Alan even got into a bed on set provided by the show to demonstrate and discuss how he was sexually assaulted by ghosts.
Even today, can you share it with us?
Yes. One night, we were lying in bed. Carmen had already fallen asleep. I felt this strange sensation coming over my body. It started at my feet and started climbing up through my body. Before I had a chance to reach over to Carmen to tell her something was wrong, I was froze. I couldn't move. And then I felt this stinging penetration in my anal area. And I was trying to scream, cry out to Carmen to help me somehow. After a while, I don't know how long, it had gone away. There was no more sensation. I woke Carmen up and I said, Carmen, I think I was just sodomized by this demon.
This happened to me as well, Sally.
After Alan's gruesome retelling, Carmen confirmed that she too had been assaulted by an evil, menacing presence who would laugh as they molested her. The studio audience sat open-mouthed as Sally interviewed Carmen and Alan's son, who spoke of cat-like eyes watching him in his bed. Carmen claimed the ghosts would mimic her children's voices, calling to her, "Mommy, Mommy," drawing her to them as they transformed into dark, inky entities. Their niece spoke of her own sexual encounters with the ghosts and cried on stage, unable to produce full sentences. Carmen insisted that she had become possessed by an entity who had taken her into a pitch-black place. She presented childlike sketches of her possession, claiming that she had been under for 8 hours. It was puzzling, grotesque, scary, and extremely unusual. Very reasonably, Sally asked Carmen, "Why would you stay in a house like that?" But Carmen insisted that wherever they went, the activity followed. So much so that her coworkers gave her the phone number to a couple who they hoped could help. Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens also appeared in the episode, vehemently defending the Snedeker family's claims. But the neighbors were not quite so convinced. One man who moved into the home after the Snedekers said that it was all a hoax. Another neighbor said that the claims were financially motivated. And yet another said that all of the activity was easily explained away. The Snedekers, however, were resolute.
I'm also a neighbor, and we had been hearing odd noises about 3 o'clock in the morning. So I decided to put a journal next to the bed and write down what went on during the night.
So you're a neighbor who everything that happened at night, you would document.
Right. And I discovered that there were usually things going on in the neighborhood that explained the things they put in the newspaper.
Such as?
Oh, when the chains would rattle. One time at 3 o'clock in the morning, a car, in fact, there were 3 cars this particular night, the noise woke us up. And they would hide in the shadows of a tree down the street, and then they would come driving by. But if anything else came by, they would take off very fast, like they didn't want to be seen. One of the trucks had a bad muffler, and it really rattled our house as well as anybody else around. There were chains dragged.
So you're saying that
when
what we
heavier
saw was
trucks went down the road, around that time some repairs had been done in the road, and heavy trucks would come down, and when they'd hit this repair in the road, it would rattle all the houses around us.
Excuse me, I don't mean to be disrespectful.
How can
I
a
like
car
this
make that kind of
woman.
vibration?
But what we experienced was not a traffic problem. It was in the house. The
was in the
floor
house, not
was
outside.
clutter. What about the covers coming off? What about the sodomization? What about the apparitions my children
The whole
saw?
point, though, Sally, the whole point with this is, I have a 7 and a 6-year-old.
But what did the professionals think? Ed and Lorraine Warren came on air to weigh in on what they thought was the catalyst for the hauntings in this former funeral parlor.
You both launched an investigation into the house, and you discovered a very shocking thing that actually happened in the funeral parlor involving the bodies. What happened?
Well, we feel through our investigation that necrophilia, or abuse of corpses, had occurred in that home. Not necessarily by the undertaker. It could be anybody that went in there. Now, this case is not as isolated.
There was no evidence provided for this theory, but it sure was great TV. In true talk show fashion, the Snedekers and the Warrens teamed up against the naysaying neighbors in a wonderful back-and-forth shouting match.
Were you in the house?
No, I've been standing. I lived across the street before you.
Were you in the house?
Still
You're
lived there.
one of the ones that came around the house go boo, boo through the window.
No, once you guys started doing this and it got to the paper.
Sounds like something you do.
Very likely.
You're probably one of the guys I chased down the street.
I'd like to know how much you
Why would I run all the way down the street
especially
when I
you,
live across the
are
street?
getting paid off by the landlord to do this kind of stuff. Because you know
How
as
much
well as
money are
we
you
do-
making today?
You know as well as we do that what went on in that house actually occurred. We have the proof. We have people out here investigating.
Question.
We went through the same thing as the Snedekers.
To be fair to the Snedekers, another neighbor in the audience did confirm that after they moved out, another family moved into the home. but only briefly, before they made a hasty departure. The neighbor thought that they too were uncomfortable in the house. Carmen did admit that her teenage son had experimented with drugs, but Lorraine Warren noted that the drugs and the adolescents could have been feeding the paranormal activity. One of Ed and Lorraine Warren's investigators, who spent 9 weeks in the house, adamantly insisted that the neighbors were incorrect. The house was, in fact, teeming with activity. The interview descends into such a spectacle of shouting, finger-pointing, and wild accusations that Sally calls for a much-needed commercial break. When the show resumed, Sally asks an expert named Joe, limited credentials provided, what his thoughts on the matter were.
Joe, you say the investigations the Warrens conducted is baloney. Why?
Well, I've investigated haunted houses for some 20 years and a professional psychologist. Pardon?
Is there such a thing?
I've not met a house that I thought was haunted. I think the Warrens have never met a house that they didn't think was haunted.
I think that you are mistaken.
As expected, that crack set Ed Warren off immediately. And Sally turned into a full-on referee as Ed calls Joe a liar and taunts him by refusing to allow the man to speak without interrupting him. The show ends with more audience questions and comments, and the real takeaway is, 1, was the house haunted, or was this all just made up? 2, did the Snedekers know that it was a funeral home when they moved in? And 3, did the Catholic Church get involved? Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to find out more, why not purchase the Snedeker's book?
Thanks to my guests, and whatever you believe about the story, the book is worth picking up. It's called In a Dark Place, The Story of a True Haunting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Whether you believe the Snedekers or not, it is undeniable that their story is one of the strangest and most captivating interviews in the history of television. Do you ever lie awake in bed at night and wonder, what is happening in the West London Witch Patreon? Are you plagued by the feeling that you're missing out? Do you want more content and a sneaky look into the inner workings of the West London Witch? Well, I just wanted to pop in and say that joining Patreon is super easy and affordable. I am very aware that we are deep in a cost of living crisis. So for as little as $1, €1, £1 a month, you can unlock the entire West London Witch Patreon and gain access to loads of additional content that you will never experience here on the main show. Patreon is a place where I share extra special interviews, behind-the-scenes stories and gossip, and answer your questions. And in return, you're also helping support the show as we work to share with you the best storytelling at the highest studio quality. So come join us at patreon.com/The West London Witch. Hello and welcome to episode 89 of The West London Witch. a podcast where we share stories about those moments where we find ourselves very much not alone. Today's case is one of the most famous and hotly debated ghost stories of the 20th century. The Snedeker family story has been recounted over and over and over again. It was the inspiration for the 1992 novel In a Dark Place, written by the Warrens, the Snedekers, and author Ray Grafton. The story was brought to life again in 2009 in the movie The Haunting in Connecticut. And it has been the topic of endless documentaries, TV specials, podcasts, and articles. The story has never been told the same way twice. I'd like to tell you that today's episode is the definitive account, the true story. But this is just another, lesser-known account of this iconic case. Today, Chris McKinnell, Ed and Lorraine Warren's grandson, tells us all about the 9.5 weeks he spent investigating the Snedeker home. His story also differs from other accounts. But he was there, and he was the lead investigator on the case. This is Chris's story. Chris's account of what he calls the Southington case. I'm Rebecca Strazina, and this is the West London Witch. Episode 89, The Real Haunting in Connecticut.
The Snedeker case. I always called it the Southington case because it was in Southington, Connecticut.
The Snedekers were your average, hardworking, all-American family living in Monticello, New York. The family consisted of the mother and father, Carmen and Alan, and their 4 children, Philip, Brad, Alan Jr., and Jennifer. I would like to take a moment to note that the family's names, ages, and even how many children are in the Snedeker family changes from retelling to retelling. Sometimes there are 2 sons. Sometimes the family are called the Parkers or the Campbells. Sometimes the daughter is reported and sometimes she's not. This is a hideously confusing case to research because there are endless inconsistencies. However, for today's story, we will be using the names that are publicly recorded in the primary resources. So to reiterate our cast of characters, we have the mother and father, Carmen and Alan, and their 4 children. The eldest son, Philip, then Brad, Alan Jr., and their youngest daughter, Jennifer. There is also Carmen and Alan's 18-year-old niece who will enter into our story later on.
Carmen and Al were married. He was the stepfather of the older kids. There was also a niece who lived in the house. The oldest boy had leukemia, and they were living in New York State, and she would have to commute to Farmington, Connecticut to go to the University of Connecticut Medical Center like 3-4 times a week for treatments. And they knew that they couldn't keep doing that. That was hours every single trip, and his body couldn't handle that. So she was desperate to find a place to live, and she found this home in Southington, Connecticut.
While driving through town one day after Philip's treatment, Carmen came upon a house for rent. It was an absolute godsend, perfect for the family. A large Victorian home that had been split into 2. The top floor was an apartment that already had tenants within, but the ground floor and basement were available. And it had more than enough space for the family to make a landing pad for their sick son. This was going to revolutionize Philip's road to recovery.
And she went in, she looked at it, had plenty of bedrooms, it was a good price. She ignored all of the things that she didn't understand, like the drainage table in the basement in the embalming room that was still there, or the chain hoists that would lift the coffin from the basement embalming room up to the what is now the master bedroom. And she didn't realize this was a former funeral home.
Now, at this point, you might be wondering how on earth Carmen Snedeker missed these massive red flags. And to be fair, many critics have also taken issue with this part of the story. But Carmen would contest these criticisms. She was simply looking for a home close to the hospital, a place where her son could receive treatment, heal, and convalesce without the massive commute. Her focus was on her sick child, not the idiosyncrasies of the home. So, the family moved in. Incredibly, the house was still full of grave markers, buckets of embalming fluid, and even a massive blood stain soaked into the basement floor.
The oldest loved the basement. There were 2 rooms down there, and he didn't want the embalming room. He wanted the other room. But the other room did have 2 French doors that would go into the embalming room. From the very first night he was there, he started seeing figures moving in the embalming room. He'd hear things. I do recall he was saying things like, one night he was in the basement and his little sister came down. He saw her, chased her up the stairs, like, what are you doing up? Why are you down here bugging me? He got up the top of the stairs. He's running around looking for her, and he sees Carmen and Al and says, yeah, she was just down there bothering me. I says, she's been asleep for hours. And they went and they checked. She was asleep. That's something known as a doppelganger. That's a spirit or energy that reflects the image of a living person or even a dead person. All right. So my grandfather would tell you that it was meant to cause confusion and then fear, which does make sense. These things do manifest. I used to say they used to feed off of our fear and our negative energy, but I don't think they do. They manifest with that energy. There's a subtle difference. See, to say they eat the energy, that they feed off of it, makes them sound alive. And what we are dealing with here, I will say it today, in the Southington case and in the Haunting in Connecticut case, I don't know what we were dealing with, but it was incredibly destructive. So the eldest boy started displaying darker and darker emotions. He started hearing things. He started acting out and getting in trouble, started wearing all black and reporting phenomena. His next oldest brother also was reporting having seen these things. But Carmen and Al didn't believe in the paranormal, didn't believe in anything like that. They brought him to the doctors, and the boy was diagnosed with schizophrenia based on his being treated for leukemia. They put him in an asylum, trying to get him treatment for that. At the same time, he was being treated for cancer.
Philip was in a terrible way. As if undergoing treatment for Hodgkin's lymphoma wasn't enough, he was now complaining to his parents of a whole new host of ailments. Nightly, he heard terrifying noises within the basement. He told his mother that an old man in a pinstriped suit came to his bedside. He was tormented by the vision of a young man with long, dark, shaggy hair. And tragically, he had been visited by a little boy dressed as Superman. Were these ghosts connected to the funeral home? Or perhaps something more sinister? Regardless of any supposed paranormal activity, it was Philip's change in attitude and demeanor that really terrified his family. He was dark, moody, sullen, and had intrusive thoughts about killing Alan. Clearly, Philip needed urgent help, and the family were hopeful that if he was out of the house and in treatment for the schizophrenia, the activity would cease. However, not only did it persist, but it found a new victim to terrorize.
It started also going after her niece, who was 18 years old at the time and living in the house. The niece was in the shower when she felt hands through the shower curtain touching her and came running out, screaming, of course.
Sadly, this wasn't the first time the niece had been inappropriately touched by this unseen force. One evening, prior to the shower incident, she had been laying in bed when all of a sudden she had felt a hand lift up the bedclothes by her feet. Stunned, she laid there as she felt an icy hand slide its way up her leg, thighs, and back. Horrified, she grabbed her rosary and began to feverishly pray. Yet, while uttering a terrified Hail Mary, the rosary shattered in her hands. Screaming, she ran from the room, seeking out Carmen for comfort and safety. However, Carmen and Alan were not convinced. They were certain that Philip had poisoned the well and had whipped up a fear within the house. There were no ghosts, just overactive imaginations. But soon, the entity was not just attacking the niece, but also Carmen. And the levels of assault reached new, horrifying levels. Carmen began to fall under vicious attacks. She described these events as physical and sexual acts of violence. She would writhe on the floor in pain as unseen forces violated her body. She described these offenses as acts of rape.
My grandfather called this an incubus. An incubus, from Christian demonology, is a demon that attacks women sexually and violently. Although there are stories throughout history of women taking on these demon lovers as something they want. And remember I told you that there was somebody living above the Snedekers? She was a waitress. She also reported to us that she had things going on.
As the activity escalated, it wasn't long before even Alan was experiencing unexplainable activity.
Al, before he came under attack, before we were involved, he would be hearing music in the house, and he would search the entire house. He got so frightened that somebody was coming in the house. He was carrying a gun around the house while he's searching for this. So he was also experiencing these things as it's starting to build.
Soon panic had taken over the family. The physical sexual attacks on Carmen, the niece, and the neighbor lady had now extended to Alan as well. The family were all sleeping in one room together due to fear, and Carmen and Alan were worried an accident could occur as Alan patrolled the house nightly with gun in hand. If Philip had been the issue, if his supposed schizophrenia had caused this activity, why was it persisting with him outside of the home? The family needed urgent help, so they called Connecticut locals, Ed and Lorrain Warren.
When we had been invited in, my grandparents asked me if I wouldn't mind working with somebody I had never met before, who turned out to be my cousin, John Zaffels. I had never met him. He had never worked on a case before. From the day we arrived, I only left that house one night for the next 9.5 weeks.
Everywhere you look, this case is reported and known as an Ed and Lorrain Warren investigation. However, they did not work on this case, They only went into the home 3 times. Once for the initial visit and interview with the family, once for a TV interview, and lastly, for the house blessing. This case was solely Chris and his cousin John's investigation. And it was only Chris who spent the entire 9.5 weeks living in and investigating the home.
I kept detailed, literally minute-by-minute notes of my 9.5 weeks in that house. And then I gave them to the man that wrote the book, In a Dark Place. I will tell you, that book nobody should ever read. It is terrible. It's garbage. The author completely ignored all of the notes and made up this stupid story. I read this one passage where supposedly a demon shows up in this room with me and my cousin. I pass out from fright, and then he gets sodomized. Never happened. It's just ridiculous. The author has gone on to blame my grandfather, saying, "Oh, just make it scary. That's all we care about." Why would we have given him all of those materials and all of that background information if we didn't want him to tell the story correctly? Unfortunately, those notes are long gone. They've been lost. And I'm not going to be able to give you a coherent day-by-day story, unfortunately. But I'm going to give you what I can, the best I can. From the very first night, I would be there watching Carmen come under attack. There's a photo of me on the floor with Carmen on her back on the kitchen floor, hands up, trying to fight off this thing attacking her. And I'm trying to fight it off spiritually while she's being attacked. And this would go on again and again. She would go into these like trance-like states, and then she would draw what she would see. And she said she was being pulled down into this black abyss with these dark, shadowy figures all around her. I mean, don't get me wrong, horrible things happen in there. I remember one night, John walked around the corner. I think he went out to get a cigarette, and he went out the front door, and he turned around, and he said he saw this gargoyle looking at him, just straight in his face. And that was the last I saw of John for a week or two. That was it. I was also working full time, and I'd go to work, and I'd feel like something just literally stabbed me or was putting out a cigarette on my skin, just attacking me constantly.
There was no doubt in Chris's mind that there was something seriously wrong with this house. It was getting under everyone's skin, and the activity was never ending.
One afternoon, it was really hot. It was August, and the rest of the family, they were out doing whatever they were doing, but the only place there was air conditioning was in the master bedroom. So I went into the master bedroom to try to take a nap on the floor. Now, from the master bedroom, there are 2 more French doors that go down the stairs to the basement to the embalming room. And like I had mentioned, there was still the drainage table where they would, poke a spout in your neck and let it drain out. And there's this rectangle cut into the floor in the master bedroom. That's where the coffin came up, which for some reason or another was exactly where I had put down my sleeping bag to take a nap. There's this phenomenon known as sleep paralysis that many people get. It is something that is a psychological phenomena. Many people will report waking nightmares. What's going on is your body is still asleep, but your mind's awake. And somehow you end up having these nightmares where you see, a black figure or whatever over you. But that can be explained in most cases. I, on the other hand, have only ever had it happen to me in haunted homes. And in this particular case, I was half awake. I was aware. and I heard footsteps coming up from the basement. I heard the French doors open and footsteps walk over to me, and I knew something was right above me. In my head, because I can't talk, I'm using the white light to blast out. At the same time, I'm saying, by the power of Jesus Christ, I command you to be gone. By the power of Jesus Christ, I command you to be gone. And then I was free and I could move again.
This experience was the tipping point for Chris. He wanted the church involved now. Prayer seemed to work in the house. Praying over Carmen while she was under attack had been effective. Using the power of prayer in a moment like this was effective. So Chris went to the Catholic Church to ask for some guidance and a house blessing. However, he was turned away. The church, according to Chris, did not want to get involved. So, to push their hand, Chris and the Warrens turned to the media. They had hoped that if they made enough of a splash on TV, the church would have to come to their rescue. So they began to talk to magazines, tabloids, daytime television, and local news outlets. And there were no shortage of reporters willing to take on this story.
We were still doing some publicity at this time. Again, not my favorite thing to do, but this was early on in my career. I saw the value in trying to let the public know what we were doing so we can help them. So I agreed. And we all did these interviews like with the PM magazine, or maybe it was one of the other, like, I don't even remember what those old shows at 7:30 at night were called, before prime time. But we were on one of these, and the night it was supposed to be on, I was out with the kids. We were maybe throwing a Frisbee around or something in the front yard. And Carmen came out and said, "Hey guys, the interview's about to come on. Let's go inside and watch it." Just as she said that, there was a telephone pole right in front of the house. And a transformer, one of those big trash can size transformers on top of the telephone pole, it started sparking. And then it blew up like it was stuffed with dynamite. But it did knock out the power for all of Southington, Connecticut, and I never did see that interview.
Ed and Lorraine Warren would have called this a spiritual attack. But even if Chris and the Snedekers didn't see the interview, plenty of other people did. According to Chris, it was media exposure like this that did inspire the church to get involved. According to the Warrens, one afternoon, the church sent 3 priests to the Snedekers' home to perform a house blessing. It is commonly reported that an exorcism was conducted, but that is inaccurate. Present at the blessing were Ed and Lorraine, the 3 priests, and the Snedeker family. The Warrens described the blessing as a biblical event. According to Ed and Lorraine, at the climax of the blessing, the home shook and shaked with a violent fervor. The chain hoist that lifted the coffins was rattling and shaking violently, swinging back and forth. The house was icy cold, and then, inexplicably, the entire home filled with a thick, viscous black smoke.
What I found interesting was I wasn't there. I don't know why. I don't remember. It was the one of 2 days I was not there. Neither was Sean. But there was a statue of Mother Mary that the priests had brought in. But the interesting thing is, after the blessing was done in the house, and the whole house filled with billowing black smoke, after that, the 2 hands of Mother Mary were gone from the statue.
Within a month, the Snedekers moved from the Southington home.
After it was all done, the eldest boy was cured for at least a time of leukemia. Miraculously, somehow, his schizophrenia disappeared. He ended up getting married, having children, seeing the world. having a good life. Carmen went on to becoming a spiritual advisor, becoming a much more spiritual person. She and Al did get a divorce. I will say one thing about Al. Now, he worked in a rock quarry in Southington. And I mean, he was a man's man, you know? And yet, he was brave enough to admit that even he was getting attacked in bed and he had been sodomized. And to do that on national television, he did it on the Sally Jessy Raphael show. I wouldn't have done that. I mean, that was brave. That took guts. They decided they weren't going to leave that house until it was clear, because they weren't going to leave it for anyone else. That was also very brave of them. So, yeah, I think they are amazing people. Whatever happened in that house, whatever dark energy had been in there, they were unlucky enough to be in a desperate situation when their energy was at their lowest, and they interacted with it and it exploded. It was a perfect storm. It wasn't something that would happen for most people. We always have to look for those underlying issues that make them vulnerable. In this case, we've got a child who's dying. What could tear up a family more than that? I can't even begin to imagine. And I think that's where the vulnerability came in and the access. And once that was healed, I spent time, meeting with the boy, helping him to work through those things. And then he went on to a good life. So that one, at least I can say, had a happy ending.
So what exactly was plaguing this family? A sexually depraved ghost? An incubus? A succubus? Or a perverted demon?
So I don't know what that thing was. Was it created by someone before the Snedekers moved there? Is it a thought form? Is it an actual entity? Was it human? Was it inhuman? I know that my grandfather believed, without any evidence that I know of, he believed that some drifter had been hired when it was a funeral home, and this drifter molested the bodies, abused the bodies, and that this is what caused that negativity. But I have never seen any evidence to prove that or not. Honestly, I think it was just the theory he came up with. There is nothing that says that. This was a family-owned business, and from everything I've ever heard, the family had a great reputation. There's no reason to believe that. So I don't know what caused it. I really don't.
The truth of the matter is, we will never know what happened in that home. We will never have a fully coherent, cohesive, and consistent story. Even the Snedekers have told different versions of this tale on different documentaries, TV shows, and articles. The Warrens also have told stories about this investigation, even though they had very little to do with it. The neighbors have both confirmed and denied the Snedekers' accounts. There is literally no two retellings that match. And this episode is no exception. However, I do think that it is vitally important to preserve these firsthand accounts. Whether you or I believe in any of these retellings, this is what Chris experienced in that home. And this is what he recalls. And as a primary resource, I think it's so special that he shared his account with us here on the West London Witch. There is so much here to debate, question, and explore. So much so that on the West London Witch Patreon, there will be 2 additional episodes connected to this case. One featuring Chris and some of his raw feelings, emotions, and thoughts about this investigation. The other with Dr. Chavez, a professor of religion and media at Stetson University. Dr. Chavez and I go through every retelling of this case, the similarities, the differences, the changes, and the evolution. And ultimately, the takeaways. These are 2 Patreon exclusives that you do not want to miss. Do you have a spooky story you'd like to share? I'd love to hear it. Drop me an email at thewestlondonwitch@gmail.com or find us on Instagram and Facebook at The West London Witch. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. And come and follow us for additional content on Instagram and Facebook. Until next time, merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again. The West London Witch is created by me, Rebecca Strazina. Our sound designer and production magician is the incredible Danny Cross. Our theme music was bespokely written and performed by the wickedly talented Kyle Hall. Our cover art is the beautiful collaboration between Lizzie Wilson and Jake Bowser. Special thanks to Miss Sinead Bowers, our quality control and biggest cheerleader. And thank you to you, all of our listeners all over the world. These are your stories. Thank you for sharing them with us.